Hi everybody, this is Craig Tiener for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Larry, who's a beginning photographer from California. Larry shot this image in Redmond, Oregon. He says there's a mock town right by the highway with several interesting things to photograph. He says he spent the evening painting with light. He says he's a new photographer and even newer to light painting, just learning how to do this. He shot this with a Nikon D90 and ISO 200 and f10. Exposed the file for 218 seconds, and the effective focal length here is somewhere around 75 millimeters. I want to come back at the end of the critique and just make a couple of general points about night photography connected to painting with light. It'd be really neat if Larry sees this critique and can give us a little bit more backstory information. I'd love to know what white balance this was shot at, and also what kind of light that Larry was using to create the light on the old car and on the windmill and on the grass surrounding the car. One of the things that I like right away about this is just how simple it is and how the color contrast is not only making this simple but very dynamic. You have a real powerful color complementary pair from the painter's or artist's color wheel, blue and orange, and the subject matter itself is great. I love the car and I love the windmill. I love the idea of artwork, or particularly a photograph, going beyond the ordinary by suggesting another time period, and that all by itself can be very, very powerful. The other thing that I'm enjoying is just some other layers of information. The tree line back here is very beautiful. Just the silhouette of the trees really adds a lot to the image. And just the beginning of some star trails here. 218 seconds, what is that? It's about 4 minutes, a little bit less than 4 minutes. So we're just starting to get the stars trailing here at a focal length of 75 millimeters, and I'm enjoying that, particularly in a composition like this where we're going to include this much negative space of the sky. I think having a lot of negative space of the sky here works really well, considering just how powerful this orange is in the image. But it's very, very flat up here without anything going on, so it's nice to at least have some of these star trails coming in and helping to break that up and creating a little bit of texture and another layer of information at the top part of the image. Obviously the star trails go along with the feeling of this being shot at night. I also just enjoy the feeling of the light here on the ridge, sort of giving a base for the car to sit on, and I'm enjoying also some hints of sort of texture and detail down in here in the foreground that come in to the shot. One of the things that I think about in this image almost right away is the idea of positive and negative space, and for my taste I really wish that this negative space, or another negative space of the trees in the background, was coming around the windshield here. There's something for me about the windshield coming up and being pretty bright and then getting on tangent with this opening in the sky that's keeping the car from separating quite as nicely as it would like to, and the windshield is a real nice touch here on the car. It sort of starts to help us to imagine a bigger car, the top part of the car. It's also a diagonal that would start to play very importantly in a bigger print that's working right on one of the major diagonals. You know, we talk about actual contouring lines, and then we talk about implied lines, and the diagonals are always implied. And so this is a really important bit of subject matter to my eye, and I just wish that it was separating. In other words, if we move the camera around a little bit to the right, I can imagine the front part of the car sort of being up in here just a little bit more, so there's more separation and we don't have this tangency of bright areas right in here. It's one of the first things that I think about. Another thing that I think about in terms of the sort of background of the tree line is you definitely get a sense of sort of energy moving like this. And by that I mean the tail or rudder on the windmill here, whatever you call this apparatus, and the direction of the car is such a strong subject, and even the feeling of movement of diagonal like this, you get a lot of sense of this kind of movement. And then we get over to here, and when we start to sort of go down in the gutter again, and my inclination would be to take this image and to crop it so that we don't start to move in that direction, come all the way over to here so that this last little peak is there, and there's some space for this for the eye to get around that peak, but you generally have movement like this. So let's just go back and forth a couple of times with that crop, and see if that makes anybody feel any differently about the image. For me, it does. It tightens things up a bit. And if this wasn't such a graphic shot to begin with, then I might not want to do that. But this is so graphic and so straightforward to begin with that I personally like tightening it up a little bit. You know, the more I do it, I'm not going to re-record this either. The more I sit here and do this, the more I go, do I really feel that way about it? But yeah, I think I do. I think it's bringing the stars out a little bit more too. From here, my own taste is to try and lighten the image up overall a little bit more and create what I would call a little bit more layers of story. I mean, you know, right now it's sort of the car, the trees, and then the sky. I think if we brought in a little bit more detail everywhere, create a little bit more of a gradient in the sky, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But if we particularly really brought up some light along here and really made this sort of top of the hill a layer of information, and we've got just enough detail in here to brighten this up, we can slow the eye down some by creating more of a layer of information around the car. I just want to show you real quick in a hideously rough way what I'm talking about as far as the trees coming over that part of the car and helping it separate a little bit. And then I did a curves adjustment to the ridge. There it is. And I'm just doing very rough, very fast Photoshop work here for the sake of the critique, so we just have a visual to go along with what I'm talking about. I just duplicated that curves layer because I didn't think it was quite bright enough. And now we're getting a nice line of movement along the base of the car. I came in with a blank layer, painting in soft light blending mode with yellow, and just painted even more light into the car, into the windmill, into that line on the ridge that we talked about, and also into some of these areas of subtle detail in the grasses. And I just created more of an overall lightening effect to just try and give this more information, more areas for the eye to go, slow the eye down. The last thing that I think about here is, to me, this image looks like a stage. It just looks like a stage for a play or a movie. And so I can imagine a variation. This is just 4 minutes. So you could shoot a lot of these 4-minute exposures. I can imagine a variation where Larry puts himself into this as a character in the story. There are all kinds of things that we could think about almost immediately that Larry could be doing, but just the idea of just ghosting up here. There's a nice negative space over here. It could just look like somebody sort of walking over to climb up on the windmill. So you could be sitting here and leaning up against the front of the car, sort of looking up. You could go back and have some props. You could really start to get creative. But to me, this is just such a classic stage that I definitely think about adding a person. And the other thing that I think about is, it sure would be cool if there's a little bit more going on in the sky. What about a longer exposure? Even more of a feeling of star trails kind of cross-hatching on the diagonal here. Or maybe Larry's, maybe this is, it's not close. It's in Oregon. Oh, maybe it is. Maybe he lives in Northern California and he lives close to Redmond. Maybe you could go back and you get lucky and you'd have sky. And you could get some cloud action on a night with either a moon where the clouds are top lit, or starting a little bit earlier shooting where there's still a little bit of ambient light holding over from the day to give the clouds a pop of light. It looks like there's some light coming from over here. Maybe that's from a city, and that would add some detail to the bottom of clouds. I just got a new light for light painting at night that I like quite a bit. It's nothing fancy. It's just a Coleman Max 3-color LED light. It's about $30. I was just going to mention that. And also just the idea of white balance. If you're just getting into this, I'd really encourage you to do some tests on your white balance. You know, going from tungsten up to daylight and sort of seeing what you like best. A lot of times, daylight white balance and long exposures will start to go real muddy warm, particularly if there's a lot of ambient light from human activity, homes, street lights, and those kind of things. And sometimes going to tungsten white balance will help to clean that up. Really cool shot from Larry. Larry's a beginning photographer. My hat's off to him for embracing something like light painting when he's just getting into photography. You know, this is something that's way more technically difficult, obviously, than just walking around taking pictures. So hats off to Larry for creating a really dynamic shot. Beautiful color. Love the subject matter, and love the way light has been added to this. You know, just the original version of this before the crop, just the way that it is a gorgeous shot. And I want to say a big thank you to Larry for sharing this with us on The Mindful Eye. I hope to see you again real soon on The Daily Critique.